Part 4. They continued down the dimly lit streets, Jason's eyes constantly scanning for any signs of danger, any movement in the shadows. The silence between them was heavy. They had seen enough. They had heard enough. But there was still one thing Jason had to know: how far did the corruption go? As they approached the intersection, Jason spotted a black sedan parked near the curb, its engine idling. His heart skipped a beat. The same car he had seen outside the safe house. Ryan froze beside him. That's them. They know we're coming. Jason gritted his teeth. There was no time to waste. The only option now was to confront them, get to Harris, and make sure the truth came out before anyone else was hurt. He stepped forward, pulling Ryan along with him, and approached the car cautiously. The figure in the driver's seat remained still, his face obscured by the darkened window. Jason didn't stop. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He reached the car, pulling the door open just as the figure inside made a quick motion to reach for something beneath the seat. But Jason was faster. "Freeze!" he barked, his gun raised. "I'm not playing games." The figure froze, hands raised slowly, palms out. Jason could see the fear in his eyes now, the same fear that had been there when the men in suits had cornered them. It was the fear of being exposed. But there was something else in the man's face, too, something familiar. Jason's heart dropped when the figure in the car lowered his hands, revealing his identity. It was Director Harris. Jason's world tilted. "Jason, you shouldn't have come," Harris said softly, his voice tight. His eyes were filled with something that resembled regret, but it was buried deep beneath layers of tension. Jason's gun remained aimed at him, his finger lightly pressing against the trigger as his mind spun. "What the hell, Harris?" Jason growled, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You warned me. You told me to get to the safe house. And now you're—" "I had to," Harris cut him off, his voice low, almost pleading. "I didn't have a choice, Jason. They've got leverage on me, on all of us. You have no idea what they can do." Ryan stepped forward, his eyes wide in shock. "What do you mean? What's going on here, Harris?" Harris ran a hand through his hair, his usual composed demeanor unraveling before them. "You think it's just a few bad officers, a handful of leaks? No. This goes all the way to the top. The entire department is compromised. And I was forced to make a deal." Jason's mind raced as he processed Harris's words. The web of corruption was wider than he had imagined, but there was something else, something that didn't sit right. "No," Jason said, his voice hardening. "You were in on it from the start, weren't you? You were using me." Harris flinched, but he didn't deny it. "I had no choice. They made sure of it. They threatened my family. And now they want you, Jason. They want you out of the way because you're the only one who knows too much. They'll stop at nothing to silence you." Ryan stepped back, his face pale with shock. You knew all along." "No." Harris shouted, his voice breaking. "I never wanted this to happen. But they've been pulling the strings for years. I thought I could protect you. Thought I could protect everyone. But now," he trailed off, glancing at the road behind them, his eyes flicking nervously. "It's too late. They're coming for you. They're coming for both of you." Jason tightened his grip on the gun, his mind still reeling. He wanted to believe Harris. He wanted to think that there was some small shred of decency left in the man. But the facts were clear. Harris had played both sides. He'd played Jason. "Do you have the evidence or not?" Jason demanded, not letting Harris off the hook. His voice was cold, cutting through the tension in the air. Harris hesitated for a long moment, then slowly nodded, reaching into the glove compartment. He pulled out a thick folder, the same one Jason had seen earlier. His eyes locked with Jason's for the briefest second before handing it over. "Take it," Harris whispered. "This is everything. It's the only way to take them down." Jason grabbed the folder, feeling the weight of it in his hands. This was it. The evidence he needed to expose the corruption, to bring everything to light. But as he looked at Harris, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all one last, desperate attempt to cover up the truth. "You've made your choice, Harris," Jason said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now we make ours." The men in suits would be coming soon. Jason didn't have much time. He turned to Ryan, eyes locking. "We're getting out of here. We're taking this evidence to the press. They won't be able to stop us." But as Jason stepped away from the car, a distant rumble of engines reached his ears. A convoy was approaching. They were running out of time. This story is building to a climax. If you've been with us this far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The final showdown is upon us, get ready for the ultimate revelation. The engines roared as the convoy neared, the sound cutting through the tension in the air. Jason felt his pulse race. The clock was ticking. They had the evidence, the proof they needed to take down the entire operation. But the reality of what they were up against had just set in. They were cornered. There was nowhere left to hide. The headlights of the approaching vehicles flooded the street, and Jason knew they didn't have much time before the men in suits surrounded them. He turned to Ryan, the weight of the moment hanging heavily between them. "We don't have a choice," Jason said, his voice low, full of resolve. "We're going to the press. If they want to kill us for it, fine. But at least they'll know the truth." Ryan swallowed hard, his eyes full of fear, but there was something else there now. Something Jason had seen in his own reflection before, the fire to fight back, to not let them win. "Where do we go?" Ryan asked, his voice shaky but determined. Jason scanned the street quickly, calculating. "There's a media office a few blocks away. We get to the roof. We send this to every news outlet. We don't give them a chance to stop us." As the convoy skidded to a halt just a block away, Jason pushed the folder into Ryan's hands. "You hold on to it. If something happens to me, you get this out. No matter what." Ryan's eyes were filled with panic, but he nodded, clutching the evidence tightly against his chest. "I'll get it out, Jason. I promise." Jason turned and grabbed Ryan's arm, pulling him into motion. They dashed down the street, hearts pounding in their chests, adrenaline surging. Behind them, the sound of footsteps was unmistakable. The men were close. They were coming. But Jason couldn't stop now. They reached the media office and quickly made their way to the back entrance. Jason smashed the door open, his pulse racing as he scanned the interior. Empty. But only for a moment. He knew they didn't have long. "This way," Jason said urgently, grabbing Ryan's wrist and dragging him up the stairs. Every creak of the stairs under their feet felt like a countdown. The top floor. The roof. That was their only chance. They burst onto the roof, the cool night air hitting them as they staggered to the edge, looking out over the city. Jason's mind raced, but he didn't have time for doubt. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly as he opened the email app. He attached the files, the weight of the moment pushing him forward. "Do it," Jason said, handing Ryan the phone. "Send it to everyone. Everyone who'll listen." Ryan took the phone, his hands shaking as he clicked send. Jason watched the screen for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. The world felt like it was holding its breath with him. But when the message sent, Jason felt something shift inside him. The truth was out. There was no going back. Just as Ryan handed the phone back, Jason heard the screech of tires below. The convoy had arrived. Jason spun around, his back to the edge of the roof, eyes scanning the shadows. It was them, the men in suits. Their dark figures were coming toward the building. "We don't have much time," Jason said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "We've done everything we can. Now we just have to pray it's enough." Ryan's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "What happens now?" Jason turned to him, offering a small, grim smile. "Now, we fight." The sound of boots on the rooftop made Jason's heart skip a beat. The men had reached the roof. It was over. But Jason wasn't going down without a fight. Ryan looked over his shoulder, eyes flashing with something new, something strong. "We're not going down without a fight," he echoed. Jason nodded, ready for whatever came next. And then, the first man appeared from the shadows, the glint of a gun in his hand. But before he could take a step, a blinding light flooded the roof, followed by a loud voice. "Drop your weapons. All of you, drop your weapons." Jason turned to see several officers rushing onto the roof, guns raised. They were followed by an unmarked black SUV with flashing lights, more men spilling out from the vehicle. The cavalry had arrived. At the front of the group was none other than Director Harris. His face was grim, but his eyes held a flicker of something Jason hadn't seen before. Redemption, maybe. Or at least a hint of it. "Jason," Harris called, his voice carrying over the chaos. "We've got your back. It's over." Jason's mind whirled with disbelief. "What's going on, Harris?" Harris nodded toward the officers who were now surrounding the men in suits. "You were right. I couldn't let it go any further. I knew I was risking everything, but I had to help you take them down. I had to do the right thing." Jason's chest heaved with a mix of relief and disbelief. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But they had won this battle. The officers moved swiftly, apprehending the men in suits and reading them their rights. Jason and Ryan stood, motionless, watching as the corrupt officers were taken into custody. Harris approached Jason, his face somber but relieved. "It's not over yet," Harris said quietly, "but this is a start. We'll clean it up. We'll get the truth out there. The world will know what they did." Jason nodded, his heart still pounding. "It's just the beginning." Ryan stood beside him, eyes on the ground, and then looked up at Jason. "What now?" Jason turned toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was starting to break through the night. It had been a long, hard fight, but it wasn't over. The truth had been exposed, and the people who had been pulling the strings would answer for what they had done. "We move forward," Jason said, his voice filled with determination. "We rebuild. We make sure it doesn't happen again." And for the first time in a long time, Jason felt a sense of peace settle within him. It wasn't the peace of a perfect ending, it was the peace that came from knowing they had fought for something bigger than themselves. They had won. The end. If you've been with us through this journey, thank you for your support. The fight for justice may not be over, but Jason and Ryan have made their mark. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.